Welcome to the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. Today on the show, we chat with Kelly Moller, a first-term member of the Minnesota House of Representatives. She tells us about her passion for combating sexual assault, how that led to her becoming a prosecuting attorney, and most recently sparked her desire to run for public office. We delve into what it's like to be a woman in the legislature, where do ideas for bills come from, and does she get swarmed at the grocery store for being a political celebrity? Kelly, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I feel like we should address maybe the elephant in the room a little bit in that, you know, at a dinner party, there's two things probably not to talk about. One of those is politics and the other one is religion, right? And here we're having a whole podcast somewhat on politics, but I think it's important for us to have, for you to come in and to hear your story because in the world today, I just think it's the idea of getting involved and being involved and the idea of hearing everyone's perspective is important. So I appreciate you coming here today and tell your story.
I couldn't agree more. Glad to be here.
All right. So you are currently serving in the Minnesota House of Representatives. You're representative for District 42A.
That's
Is that correct?
Yep.
So prior to public office, or maybe even along with public office, what's your primary occupation?
So I am an attorney, and for about 20 years now, I've been a prosecutor or been involved with victim rights advocacy.
So tell me what exactly kind of stuff are you doing?
Yeah. So, well, I went to law school because I had friends in college who told me they were survivors of sexual assault. And so that issue became really important to me. And that's why I became a prosecutor. I handle felony level appeals now. So I don't just handle sexual assault cases, but those cases have kind of been my passion over the years. So I worked for the Attorney General's office for a number of years. And then I worked for a nonprofit for a while, just trying to advocate on behalf of victims of sexual assault mainly, but other kinds of crimes as well. And then currently at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office where I handle felony level appeals.
Okay. A few years ago, you decide to start getting involved in local government. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I really wasn't ever actively involved in politics, always kind of been interested in the political scene. But the 2016 election really changed the trajectory of my career and my life, really. As I mentioned, I've been really activated in the area of sexual assault. And so for me, having our country elect a president who bragged on tape about the things that we all heard really was life-changing. And so I became an activist. I knew I could no longer sit on the sidelines and just sort of loosely follow politics. I knew that I needed to become involved. And so I became an activist. And I think people maybe got tired of hearing me complain because people started suggesting that I run for office.
Right.
If I really wanted to do something about it, they said, why don't you run? And I started to hear that from a lot of different people in my life, whether from coworkers or family members or friends. And I heard it from enough people. They say it takes a woman 7 asks to consider running. And I heard it from enough people that I thought, you know, maybe this is the right path for me. And so I decided to do it, and here I am.
So what did you think when you started on that path? Were you like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done that. I mean, how did you do a lot of research before you just decided to pull the trigger on it, or what?
I did talk to a lot of people with experience. There are a lot of great organizations out there who will help either female candidates or first-time candidates. So I tried to gather as much information as I could, but I didn't have a lot of time to do the amount of research I would have liked to have done because I had an endorsement battle. So there were 3 of us seeking the DFL endorsement. And so really when I decided to run in the summer of 2017, even though the election wasn't until the fall of 2018, it was full steam ahead.
Okay, so it's 15 months, 18 months of work
easily.
leading up to it.
Right.
And when is a primary done prior to an election?
So what we do is we have endorsing convention. So there's a caucus and convention, and each party has that. And so they endorse their candidates. And then if anybody wants to run that isn't endorsed, they'll challenge the endorsed candidates in a primary. So then you decide when you go to the primary, am I going to vote with a Democrat ballot or Republican ballot, and who do I want my candidate to be in the general election.
Okay.
So I didn't have a primary challenger. I got the endorsement. The other candidates decided not to run in the primary.
Okay.
And so then on the ballot, I was on the ballot in the general election against the Republican.
So how far in advance do you get an endorsement?
So that happens generally in the winter before. So February, March, that's usually when the endorsing conventions take place.
Okay. And so I feel like an outsider not really digging into if somebody wanted to run for office, how does it work? Obviously, it takes a lot of money to run a campaign. How do you start that process?
Yeah, so we're lucky in Minnesota because we have a sort of state-assisted campaign to try to keep money local with small donations from individuals. So candidates can decide, and I think most candidates do this, they sign an agreement and then they can get money from people, and then people will be reimbursed by the state for $50 per individual, $100 per couple.
So you're saying in Minnesota, if you make a political contribution up to, $100, the state will refund you that contribution?
Right. So it's the political contribution refund program. So it's $50 per individual, $100 per couple per year. And if you give that to a candidate who's signed on to this agreement, then the candidate sends you a receipt. You mail that into the state, and the state will issue you a check in a few weeks. If the candidates both sign that agreement, then not only are we able to encourage folks to contribute and get their money back, but we're also limited with the amount of money we're allowed to spend. And so that tries to keep, again, the money local into a more manageable amount. It's still a lot of money. It's about $70,000 for a first-time candidate. And then there are restrictions if you sign that, how much money you can take from PACs, how much money you can take from a political party, again, with the idea that we really want individuals to be contributing to the campaigns for the people that they support.
And what is a PAC?
So a political action committee.
Okay.
So you hear a lot about that in the news and the influence that PACs may have over elections or over politics in general.
So could that be, in an example, a company that would want you to vote a certain way? Are they involved in a PAC, or is that how they filter their money?
Yeah, that's often how it is. And you hear on the federal level more about pharmaceutical companies or oil and coal industries, but there are a lot of PACs out there.
Okay, and so you're limited when you sign this program to help get some state funding. You're limited on what you can take from
Right,
that.
Exactly.
Got it. So you win the election. And was it by a lot? Was it close? Was it
I
not?
did, yeah. I won. It had been my district. So 42A is Shoreview, Mounds View, Arden Hills, so northern suburbs. And it's been a swing district over the years. But I won it by a pretty good margin. And, it was pretty consistent with what we were seeing around the state, where women in the suburbs won by higher margins this last election.
Yeah.
And we've helped flip the House from Republican to Democrat.
Cool. How long is your term?
So it's a 2-year term.
And you're into your first year of the 2-year.
Right.
Term.
So it's a 2-year term, and the first year is the fiscal year, the budget setting year.
Okay.
And then the second year is more of the policy year. So we just finished up the budget setting year.
Got it. It feels like 2 years is really fast.
2 years is really fast.
So you went through the budget. So how was this first year going through the budget? I mean, and I think something you have mentioned before, different in state government versus the federal government, is we have to balance our budget, right?
Right.
Every year?
Yeah, we have to balance our budget. So because of that, a lot of times we're waiting for the budget targets from the leadership. So the House will go ahead and vote on what they want, and because we're split, so the House was controlled by Democrats, the Senate was controlled by Republicans. So the House, the Senate, and the governor all come up with their budget proposals at the beginning, and then we're voting on those during the course of the term. But then really what it comes down to at the end is what is the agreement? What are the budget targets for each individual committee? What's the pot of money that's going to be available, for example, for the public safety world? What's the pot of money that's going to be available for transportation? So we have our ideas and we're voting on those throughout session, but really it comes down to the end. What are the leaders agreeing to with the amounts?
Was there a significant budget item this go around, like something that was contentious
Yes.
To get it balanced, I guess?
There were many things that were contentious. A couple of the things were really 3 areas, I'd say: education, transportation, and healthcare.
Okay.
So for education, the House funded education with an increase of 3% and 2% going for the next 2 years, or 2% and 3%. But and then the Senate only did 0.5%, which actually would have been a cut for our education. So that was one big area. Another thing you might have heard about was the gas tax, which was something that was proposed by the House but opposed by the Senate. And that did not end up being part of the final agreement. And then the other thing that you might have heard about was the continuation of the healthcare provider tax, which again was something that the House proposed and that the Senate initially opposed but did end up agreeing to continuing on that tax.
And ultimately, just so we're clear in kind of order of control there, does the Senate have the say, or does it have to be an agreement between the House and the Senate?
Really at the end, there needs to be an agreement.
An agreement between the
And so that's why the governor, the House Majority Leader, and the House Speaker, and then the Senate Leader all have to agree on sort of those big picture items, not only the money for each different individual thing, but then some of those things that were maybe more controversial, they needed to come to an agreement on so that then they could present that larger package back to the respective bodies.
Besides balancing the budget, of course, some of the other things, one of the other roles of a House member is you can propose bills. Did you get any opportunity to do that so far in your first term?
I did. So you can author bill or co-author bills. And so I authored a number of bills and am happy to say that about 9 of the bills that I authored made it through the finish line, which was really great. I know you don't have any.
Well, but like 9, how many bills are, I mean, is this 9 of 1,000 bills? Or, I mean, it seems like that's a big number when you're just getting out there, right?
That is a big number. But I think I heard between the House and the Senate over 3,000 bills are actually introduced.
Wow.
But a lot of them, what happens is bills will get introduced. A lot of them don't get heard in committee, or a lot of them might be really similar, but, just slightly different. And so I think with co-authoring, it was over 100 bills that I had either authored or co-authored. But of the bills I authored, that was I'm really happy with the number that made it to the finish line, because it's a lot of work to get your bill signed into law.
Here's my question. So is there's a budget session, right? And then there's time to write and propose these bills. Right? Like how big help me understand that, because I hear about in session or not in session, and is that related to the budget? Or is that related to the budget and ratifying bills and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's not really related to the budget, but it does depend on the year. So in the budget years, the session's a little bit longer. We started in January and ended in May. Okay. And then in the non-budget year, the policy year, will start in February and end in May. So that's when you hear we're in session, that's what that means. And that's when we're actively hearing bills and voting on bills. Okay. When we're not in session, it's the interim period. And technically, we're not employed necessarily because it's considered a part-time job, but everybody I know is working really hard in the interim, mainly to work on the bills that we want to see move forward next session.
And when do you get because you got elected, November of last year, right?
Right.
When do you get an opportunity to write or to co-author all of these bills? Does that start right away in November, or do you get sworn in January? Is that how that works?
Yeah, you get sworn in January, elected in November. So there really isn't a lot of downtime. Yeah. You're kind of trying to figure out also as a new person, just how does this process even work? And really the most important thing that we haven't talked about yet is constituent work, because you're wanting to hear from the people who live in your district and find out what's important to them, respond to questions or concerns they have. So you're trying to get all of those systems in place so that when you get sworn in, you can just go right to it.
Wow. How many of your bills that you authored or co-authored, was it your thought, or how much of those were thoughts that were maybe brought to you by your constituents?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's a combination of things. Mm-hmm. So 2 of my favorite bills were constituent-driven, and one of those bills was from a man who lives in my district who was in a car crash several years ago, and it was a very severe crash, and the first responders didn't know who to contact in his family. He was unconscious. He was in his 20s. He was living on his own. And so the address didn't have anybody else living there. And it took law enforcement like 8 hours to figure out who his family was, and he was in a life or death situation. So he came to me with his idea to allow you, when you get your driver's license or renew your license, to provide 3 emergency contacts in the event of an emergency. And so he worked with an organization called the Brain Injury Alliance to really push and promote that legislation. I was happy to author it. Our state senator also took it on the Senate side, and we were able to get that bill signed into law. So in the future, when it goes into effect, next time you renew your driver's license and you're asked if you want to provide emergency contacts, you'll know that that came from someone who lives in my district.
Wow, that's fantastic. One of the other things I was thinking about is what got you into being an attorney was sexual assault stuff. Have you had any opportunity or on pursuing that angle while you have your office?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took several different sexual assault bills, and one of those bills was a result of a court case that I saw in my practice that we just needed to tweak some language. So that bill went through, and that had to do with sexual assault of minors. And then one of the other big bills I had was to create a working group to look at rewriting all of our criminal sexual conduct statutes. And I worked with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault on that bill. And really the impetus behind that was the Denied Justice series from the Star Tribune that talked about how many survivors were, when they came forward, which we know is actually a small percentage, but when they came forward, either their cases weren't properly investigated, or they didn't go to prosecution, or they were acquitted. And so this is really to look at how our laws are written and how we can do better at seeking justice for victims of assault. So that bill finished, and that working group is starting its work on August 15th.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, it seems like you're getting at everything right away. So you are an attorney. It seems like with, bills and laws and all that kind of stuff, that being an attorney would be a significant advantage. I mean, that's not a requirement, though, to be a member of the House, right?
Right, it's not. And that's probably a good thing. We don't need all attorneys there.
Right.
But I was really happy to have that law degree because I'm reading statutes, every day of my career. I am applying the Constitution every day of my career. And so when I had bills in front of me, I know where to look. I know what questions to ask. And there's such a steep learning curve for all of us. So I was really happy to have that, at least that skill set, to bring to the table.
So getting back to that learning curve stuff, when you just get in there and you're trying to figure out, is there a tutorial? I mean, is there do they sit down all the brand new representatives and say, here's how things work? Or, I mean, what happens when you get in? How do you figure it out?
It's a lot like having children.
Okay.
It just happens, and you've got to, there are some guidebooks and things you can use, but really until you're there experiencing it, it's hard to explain. I will say that the House has amazing staff. They have nonpartisan staff who work on the different committees, and they are just a wealth of knowledge and information. And again, they're nonpartisan, so they give us the big picture about things, the nitty-gritty details, and we can go to them and ask them for research. They're the ones who really draft the bills. If you have an idea, we don't have to figure out the language necessarily. They will work on the draft of the bill.
Great. So I was curious, because I've talked to other people that, even run major corporations, and they're not super comfortable about public speaking. Did you have to do a lot of that when you were on the campaign trail, and is that something you're comfortable with?
I'm really comfortable with public speaking. Yes, you have to do a lot, but what I really like to do is prepare a lot for a speech, or when I'm going to court, I really am very well prepared. But when you're on the campaign trail, it's really like a constant job interview in the public. So you have to get very skilled at thinking on your feet, and you don't have a lot of time to research everything. And so really what it comes down to is just being honest, too. If you don't know the answer to something, someone's asking you a question about an issue you don't know something about, trying to get over that fear of, I don't know the answer, and just saying, I don't know that right now, but I can look into that and let you know. But the public speaking part of it was not something that was nerve-wracking for me.
Are you in kind of this digital and social media age? Does it give you a little stress or anxiety about exact word placement. You know what I mean? It just feels like if you say the wrong thing, that's just now permanent record everywhere. Or if, you know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like you'd want to be more calculated in your speech. I mean,
yeah, and social media thing does put a whole different spin on things, and just trying to figure out what you want to say about something, and knowing. I can give you an example. I'm very outspoken on gun violence prevention. That issue is important to me. I ran on that. I know it's important to the people in my district, and I've had some posts on that, and I just know that I'm going to get some pushback on that whenever I post on certain topics. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop posting on that.
And you, do you have a Twitter account?
I do. I have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Yep. Yeah, it seems like not just from a political standpoint, but just particularly Twitter, that people just give an emotional reaction right away, or some cases uneducated or whatever it is. That it just, I guess what I'm thinking about is.
Are you talking about our leader?
Yeah, I'm talking about our leader that I just wish that he deleted that Twitter account. That would be so happy. Well, there's a couple of things I'm thinking about is, the idea of potentially being emotional, so I don't know how measured you are with that. The other thing I think about from social media standpoint is I just feel like as a society, we're just playing into our own echo chamber, right? That if we're talking politics and you want to be a Republican, that you're just only talking to Republicans, or if you want to be a Democrat, you're only talking to Democrats. How do you suggest people get out of that, right? Because, I mean, we just seem so polar these days, one way or another.
I don't know. That's like $1 million question. I don't know how we solve that problem. What I try to do is not engage in back and forth on political issues. Like, I might post my opinion. I often do, and people might agree or disagree with me, and that is perfectly fine. But I don't try to get into a back and forth discussion. I don't think we can change people's minds on social media. I think it's important. A lot of times I'll, when I tweet something or retweet something or post something on Facebook, I'll provide an article or something that I've read and then comment on that. So I think it's a good method to kind of put information out there, depending on, of course, what the source of that information is.
Right.
But I don't like the back and forth, because I don't think you are going to change somebody's mind in that platform. And I always tell people, and a lot of times too, it's people that aren't necessarily even Minnesotans who might be responding. I'm having this discussion. And if people really want to get into details on an issue with me that live in my district especially, all they have to do is make an appointment, and I'll sit down and talk with them, or call them, or they can email, or, whatever way they want to contact me if they live in my district. And I feel like that's the best way to have that communication.
Right. I think that's a good way, or controlled way of going about it. I know during the last election, I got to a point on social media where I just shut it off, because, if I'm out there, I just want to be happy, and I don't want battles going on all the time. And it just seems like there's a lot. So, one question that I have, particularly with all the women that I've interviewed on this podcast, is, what it's like to be a woman in your particular career, maybe not as opposed to men, but what's been your experience now in the political arena as a woman?
So it was eye-opening to me when I decided to run for office, and some of the comments and really a lot of the comments that were geared towards me that I don't think my male counterparts have experienced. So I heard things like smile more, smile less, say you're going to fight for something, don't say you're going to fight for something, change your clothes, your answers sound like a beauty pageant response. I had somebody tell me to change the tone of my voice, that it was too high-pitched. I don't have control over that.
Right. Well, these people that are saying things, are they other politicians? Are they just people on social media? I mean, where are you getting it from?
A lot of times it's from supporters who think they're providing helpful information. It has been other politicians too. Also, it's always with an intent. I think there's always a good intent, but it's really, after a while, it gets to be really old, and you realize that, again, the male politicians or candidates probably aren't hearing. they might hear a few things like this, but they aren't hearing it to the same degree that we are as women. And a lot of it's inconsistent, right. Smile more, smile less. Well, which one is it?
Right. Did you have any confidence issues at all when you kept getting, mainly on a daily basis, maybe more so now because it can be non-personal from social media or whatnot, but I just think in general, people aren't getting the feedback of how you look or what you say and how you smile. I mean, did it hurt your confidence at all as you were going through it?
I don't think it hurt my confidence. I think one thing that I want to do better at is responding to that, acknowledging that, thank you, I know you're trying to be helpful, but I don't really know what the good response to somebody is. I know you're trying to be helpful, but would you say that to a man? Maybe is the response.
Right. Yeah, I suppose. So what else was I thinking about here? Well, one thing I was thinking about is I've got a lot of people that are around our age that they're down a career path for, the first 20 years of their life, and all of a sudden there's abrupt change because they wanted to feel a little bit more meaning or purpose. Is this scratching that kind of itch for you?
Is this like my midlife crisis?
Is this your midlife crisis?
I don't know. I don't think so, because I don't think it doesn't have to do with my age or where I am in my career. I think for me, it really is a reaction to what's happening in our world, in our country, in our state. And so really, but for what happened in 2016, I don't think I would be in this position today.
What I think is interesting about it is that a lot of times I think when politics come up, it just seems like this massive thing. And maybe it's because you're looking at it more on a federal level versus a state level. But even on a state level, I think sometimes people feel that way of, I don't know that that any of it makes a difference. You know what I mean? And there's just this wall that comes up. And what would you say to people that say, I just don't think any of it matters, or that I or any one person can make a difference with that?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I've thought a lot about this and how do I reach people who feel that way. And I like to think about the day in the life of an average person. You get up in the morning and you drink water, and your water is safe for you to drink. You get in your car and you drive to work, and your car is safe for you to drive. You're driving on roads. You maybe pull over because a law enforcement, a cop car is passing you on their way to an emergency. You take your kids to school. You go to work. You pay your taxes. At your job site, you're not most likely going to die. There are protections in place to protect you at the job, et cetera, et cetera. Your life goes on. All of those things are impacted by the law, whether that's federal or state law or even local regulations and ordinances. It's all important. So for people to say it doesn't matter to me, it really does. It matters to all of us in our everyday lives.
I like it. It's a very good answer. It's a very good answer. I also have, just thinking out loud with that, there's younger people that I'm connected with, whether they're family members or friends of family or whatever, high school age kids that say, I don't want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance anymore because I don't believe in what our country is and that kind of stuff. What would you say to those people as far as the objection to that, or maybe what would be your approach as a reaction to the objection? You know what I mean? Like, how do you help those kids that are saying, I just don't even want to be American anymore, or I don't believe in what our country is?
It's really interesting with the younger generation, and how do we reach them? Where are they getting their news? Where are they getting their information? What I'm finding with youth that I have contacted me who live in my district, they are really concerned about issues. So a lot of youth, for example, are driven by environmental concerns. And so I guess I would say to young people who are feeling so distraught, even if you don't want to necessarily get behind a political candidate, but to really get engaged in an issue. So if that issue is important to you, like the Pledge of Allegiance and wanting to express your your views on that, maybe you join the Black Lives Matter movement. Or if you're really interested in, environmental issues, there are a number of environmental organizations specifically for youth to have a voice, and they can come to the Capitol, they can testify, and anybody should feel comfortable writing to both their federal and their state representatives, because, at the end of the day, that's who voted for us, and we represent those folks. And it's really important for them to write, even if they think that their representative already reflects their views. It's really important that they let their congressperson know or their state representative know what matters to them. So and it really does make a difference to us.
I don't think a lot of people are aware of how much of an impact that makes, that if you're reaching out to your representative, that things happen, right?
Right.
How many of the bills, again, that you've already put forth in the first year were from your constituents that got through?
Yeah. So, there were 2 that were driven by constituents.
Right.
And then other bills, a lot of the bills that I signed on to that I wasn't necessarily the author of, but I signed on to because I heard from people in my district that certain issues were important. I can give you an example. There's one on salting roads and how that has a negative impact on our environment. So that was something that I heard from constituents about. I didn't know much about it. I looked into it. I found out that there was this bill. I thought it was a good bill, so I signed on as a co-author to it. So, that's probably maybe more common, how we sign on to other bills and follow them or advocate for them based on what we're hearing from the people who live in our district.
I'm curious, now that you've got this initial taste on House Representative stuff, how do you see this moving forward? Is it something where you see, I can have an unlimited amount of terms as long as they'll have me, I love it, or do you go House Representatives to Senate to,
So
how does that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so right now I'm just looking at finishing my term here. I am going to run again in 2020.
Okay.
I still have my job as a prosecutor. I'm part-time there when we're in the interim, and then I take a leave of absence, and I do really love that job too. So right now I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And then redistricting is going to happen before the 2022 election. And so, that the district could look totally different then. So I don't really know beyond the next, and of course I may not get elected in 2020 either. So right now I'm just keeping my sights on next year and then the following 2 years, and then we'll see what happens from there.
Redistricting, is this gerrymandering, or is that called different on a state level than on a federal?
It's the
same kind of deal.
The concept is redistricting, and then gerrymandering is making the redistricting look like whatever you think will benefit your party.
So is it not that complex on the state of Minnesota, or are people influencing how districts are redrawn?
It is complicated, and there are a number of proposals to try to make sure that when redistricting is done in Minnesota, that we can do it in a nonpartisan fashion. So one of the things I like is a nonpartisan commission to draw those lines, but that gets some pushback too.
Got it. I'm curious, in your area with all of the campaigning you've done and whatever, do people know you? Are you like a celebrity now when you walk down the street? There she is. She had 9 bills,
No, I am not a celebrity, but inevitably I get recognized when I've come from the gym and I look like a mess and I'm at Target buying groceries.
Right. What are you have 2 boys, right?
Right.
What did the boys say? Have they been impacted at all about your involvement in government and your campaign and things that you've done?
Yes. When somebody runs for office, their whole family is essentially running for office with them.
Oh, okay.
So my older son is really interested in politics and was excited to come out, and he did a lot of door knocking for me and helping organize different events and things.
Yeah.
And he is going to be going out to college.
Right.
But he's really interested in it. My younger son, at the time I ran, was in middle school.
Okay.
And was mainly more embarrassed by me running for office.
Right.
But he's getting ready to start high school, so I hope he comes around a little bit.
No, they don't come up with their own bills that you should be writing, do they?
Actually, my high school son, so one issue that's really important in our district and based on some things that have happened in our high school is mental health issues for our youth. And he just forwarded me an article about some things other states are doing to address that issue.
Yeah, their kids are getting days off for mental health, right?
That was it. Yeah. He sent that article to me and said, "Can we do something like that here?" So
really,
yes. So he's very engaged.
Got it. So as you progress forward on this stuff, what to you would be considered successful for you? I mean, what do you really hope to? I don't know that it's necessarily what bills you want to get done, but what's your mindset about how you want to approach this and what you think would be a successful run being at the House of Representatives?
That is a great question. And I actually do think about it in terms of what bills I'd like to see pass what I'd like to accomplish while I'm there. Certainly healthcare is one of the number one topics we hear about, affordability and accessibility for healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so I really would love to see us do more as a state to make sure that people have coverage and have affordable coverage. Mm-hmm. And even, you maybe saw in the media a lot about the insulin problem that we're having, and people are dying because they're rationing insulin. So there are some things that are that we need to fix right away when we get back. And then there are other things that we need to look at fixing, but then also looking long-term, like healthcare just in general and how that's delivered in our state. Mm-hmm. Gun violence is another thing that I ran on. And as a prosecutor, I see a lot of death by gun. And so I'm really interested in some common sense solutions to gun violence. And we can accomplish that at the state level. We don't have to have, it would be great if the federal government would pass some bills, but we can actually do some things at the statewide level. Mm-hmm. So that's another topic that I'm interested in.
So it sounds like really you leave your mark with maybe some of the bills brought into law, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. So it's the bills that you've introduced, also just being really accessible and open to the people in my community. So I try really hard to make myself available if people want to talk about issues or concerns. Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we'll leave that there. Thanks for coming in today and telling your story. I think it's admirable that you're getting involved and that you're trying to make a difference, and I appreciate you coming in and telling your story.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
This has been the final episode of our second season of the Ascent podcast. Next season, we'll continue to explore ideas on achievement and uncover insights about personal perspectives on success. We'll explain more during the Season 3 preview, due out sometime January 2020. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.